Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Halper.
And I'm Aaron Mate. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Our website, as always, is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there to support our show and also get plenty of bonus content.
Indeed. And we have a great show for you as always. And I guess we should get started with the 4 basic food groups, right? Unless there's anything you'd like to share about your week, Aaron.
Afraid not. Pretty boring.
Afraid not, yeah. I have a little pop culture update.
Okay, sure. We love that. Yes.
So I don't get any kickback from this, although I should. But I've really been enjoying this show called In the Dark. It's old. It's not that recent. It's about a blind woman who solves mysteries and then gets involved in all sorts of hijinks. And it's on Netflix. And really the biggest appeal of it is that it has a really cute dog named Pretzel. But Pretzel's not in it enough. That's my big critique of it.
Sounds gripping.
It is, yeah. I want more
crime-solving
Pretzel time.
blind woman with a cute dog.
Yeah.
I'll add that to my list of things I'll never ever watch, but have them on a list.
Yeah, it's like right there. Every time I watch it, there's a line where I'm like, I cannot believe I'm watching something so corny. And yet, as Elizabeth Warren does, I persist.
Well, fair enough.
Yeah.
I haven't watched the show in a long time, but I will be making an exception for Curb Your Enthusiasm, which returns very soon.
Interesting.
Aside from that,
Yeah.
unfortunately, not the time for it. But
you got to watch some shows, Aaron. You have to have some things that you do that aren't based on the news or Twitter fights.
Hard to imagine. Hard to imagine.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to our 4 basic food groups. For Democrats suck, we are going to turn to Nancy Pelosi. Now, if you watched this week's Monday morning, you would have seen, I think, one of our all-time favorite clips where Nancy Pelosi went on CNN and declared that the people protesting her and other Democrats calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, aka an end to the genocide supported by the U.S., might be working for Vladimir Putin, and she also wants them investigated. And there was an additional
FBI.
By the FBI, and there was, on top of this being like a deranged conspiracy theory, the additional irony is that Nancy Pelosi herself effectively is working for a foreign power because she, like so many other politicians, are bankrolled by the Israel lobby, and every single year profess their fidelity to this foreign state. And are so devoted to it that they're even willing to justify a genocide and accuse critics of it basically of being foreign agents. Well, Nancy Pelosi is not done accusing her critics of that, because when protesters continued to demonstrate outside Nancy Pelosi's home, she doubled down on that playbook of accusing them of being foreign agents, but she added a twist. This time it's a new foreign adversary, China.
Oh, you spoiled. You gave it away.
Sorry.
Most of your constituents want beside you. Stop the genocide. Stop the Holocaust.
Democrats want the ceasefire. The Democrats want the ceasefire. The Democrats want the ceasefire.
In case you missed that, like before closing the door for good, she told her protesters, go back to China where your headquarters is.
Yeah. Well, I like that Nancy is being thorough. She's not just blaming Russia for creating a pro-ceasefire movement. She's also including China. It shows you that she is very hardworking, and she doesn't just stop when she finds one culprit. She could have stopped at Putin, but she found Chinese involvement as well.
There's a really funny anecdote in Ryan Grimm's latest book about the Squad, where he recalls the first time AOC met Nancy Pelosi. And obviously he's getting the story from AOC's camp. It's not AOC directly herself. And AOC recalls that the first time she met with Pelosi told her that the slogan, abolish ICE, quote, was injected into American political discourse by the Russians, and the Democrats needed to quash it. And then AOC left that meeting thinking, like, this is the leader of our party, and this is how she thinks. And yes, the answer is yes. Nancy Pelosi has coined the phrase, all roads lead to Putin. And therefore, anything that interferes with the agenda of the Democratic Party establishment and their neocon allies is the work of Russia, whether it's people outside her house protesting, or it's people calling for a humane immigration system. It's all the work of Russians. With a twist, it's also the work of the Chinese as well. And that's why she says to this elderly protester outside her home, go back to China, which, by the way, sounds exactly like something that Trump and his supporters would say.
Exactly, yeah.
So our uniparty really continues to impress.
She's so disgusting the way she points her hands at these people. I mean, we pointed this out on Monday morning that in the clip in which she accuses some of the people who are saying ceasefire now of being spouting a Putin talking point, she referred to herself as a victim, and then she caught herself and said, "I was a victim, recipient of these kinds of protesters." So this is all about Nancy's struggle.
Even the talking points that Democrats could cling to in terms of how they could differentiate themselves from Trump, they can't even do anymore because they sound exactly like the most bigoted things Trump would say, like "Go back to China, your headquarters are there,"
So
or
xenophobic.
when they would say that they want to treat undocumented immigrants humanely. Now Biden is talking about shutting down the border, which is exactly what Trump would say. So even on those issues where they could legitimately say before that they were different than Trump, now they can't anymore.
Right. And it's not only what Trump would say, but of course, if Biden does shut down the border, changes it so that the president has the ability to do that, and Trump is the next president, he's going to be shutting that border down all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He'll be continuing, instead of Biden continuing the Trump agenda, now Trump would be continuing the Biden-Trump agenda.
Exactly, yeah. Wow. Such xenophobes. And to be fair, this comes from a rich tradition that starts from, during the civil rights movement when Black radicals were portrayed as, not even radicals, just Black civil rights organizers were portrayed as in league with communist Russia. And then, of course, more recently, Susan Rice claimed that some of the George Floyd protesters were Russian. Or Russian spies or on the Russian payroll. And Kamala Harris suggested that some of the people who were supporters of Colin Kaepernick were also Russian bots.
Yes, and you're watching one of the few shows that did not buy into all that Russia mania and in fact called it out for the scam that it was. And unfortunately, I'm sorry to toot our own horn here and do a little touchdown dance, but very few people in media, unfortunately, can lay claim to opposing all this Russia baiting, all this Russia mania from the start, rather than just when it becomes so batshit crazy as Nancy Pelosi is demonstrating right now.
Yeah. Speaking of batshit crazy, here's what Nikki Haley had to say should be done in response to the killing of 3 service members on the Syrian-Jordan border.
What would that mean in practice? When you say Biden didn't do something, what was that something that he should have been doing?
The very first strike that hit, you punch and you punch back hard. What they should be doing is going after every ounce of production of those missiles. Wherever those missiles are, you take that out. You keep doing. You take out the training sites. You go and you.
But does that risk escalating a war?
Does that mean striking Iran directly?
It means striking the resources that are allowing them to hurt our troops. That's what you're doing. It's not going after
but they're backed by Iran. Iran says that they're not declaring the shots, but Iran's training them. They're providing intelligence. They're providing weapons.
And this goes
there
back.
would be no Hamas without Iran, Hezbollah without Iran, or Houthis without Iran.
But
yes, you're going.
Iran is a really big escalation. And
you go after wherever those missiles are, the production, wherever it is in Iraq and Syria, you take that out. Wherever it is in Lebanon that they're doing that, you take that out. You go after the leaders making the decisions. It's not after Iran, the country. It's after the people who are making these decisions. When Soleimani was assassinated, it sent a chill up their spine. They literally, it took their breath out. You have to be strategic. It's not starting war. It's actually preventing war.
Okay, so there she is citing the assassination of Soleimani, which most people considered extremely reckless. And this was, of course, done under Trump. And she claims that Trump is an unhinged maniac, which he is. And that was one of the unhinged maniacal things that he did. Soleimani, the Iranian general, who I have to always point out was extremely handsome.
You do point that out every single time.
I do, yeah.
you never fail.
I can't, yeah. But he, I have to. It's like the elephant in the room. He shouldn't have been killed for other reasons, but it also happened to be a major loss cosmetically.
To the handsome community, right? Yeah.
To the what? Handsome community, yeah.
Yeah.
But here she is, and lest you think this is a one-off and that she was speaking kind of impulsively and has learned to not basically call for war with Iran, which somehow she's saying that striking Iran would not lead to war. It would prevent war. I'm not sure how she thinks that would happen, but here she is making this point again on Fox News.
You're saying now's the time to hit Iran?
Now's the time to hit their leaders. It's different. Don't go and bomb the country.
What about their infrastructure?
The infrastructure in Iraq and Syria. You start with that first. You do the sanctions and you take out a couple of their leaders. That's the way
in their country?
If they're in their country, or you do like Soleimani when they left the country, you figure out where they are. Our special operations can do that. And then you take them out. That will send a message. We've got to do this immediately.
Take out some leaders here and there.
So in the first clip, it sounded like she didn't want to hit them directly in Iran. But when she shifted over to Fox News, which is more, even more outwardly pro-war than I guess CNBC, she was, take them out inside their own country. Sure, why not?
Yeah, or outside, wherever. Yeah. Citing Soleimani again. Yeah.
I mean, first of all, after the U.S. killed Soleimani, that did lead to a massive increase in attacks on U.S. forces, including an attack on a U.S. base in Iraq where soldiers there suffered serious injuries. She omits that because, of course, these politicians don't care about U.S. soldiers, as Biden just demonstrated by presiding over the deaths of 3 of them. And the reason they were killed is because he's supporting the mass murder campaign in Gaza and also won't withdraw U.S. forces from Iraq and Syria, even though they're not wanted there. But prior to October 7th, for like many months before, there was actually an undeclared truce and there were no attacks on U.S. forces. But after October 7th, those attacks resumed. And in fact, remember there was that 1 week when there was like a pause of the Gaza genocide?
Mm-hmm.
When that happened, there were no attacks on U.S. forces either. So all these militia groups in the region respected the ceasefire. And only when the mass murder of Palestinians resumed, that's when these groups resumed their attacks on U.S. forces. Right. So from Biden to Nikki Haley, they all want to keep U.S. forces there as sitting ducks to enforce the genocide of Gaza and also continue stealing Syria's oil and wheat, which is the point of the U.S. force inside Syria. The official reason is that we're fighting ISIS, but as I've reported, Pentagon's own documents show there's no basically fighting going on at all between the U.S. and ISIS. Other groups are doing that. U.S. is simply there to steal Syria's oil, as Donald Trump very helpfully pointed out when his own advisors ignored his order to withdraw troops. So he admitted, we're there to take the oil.
Right. And of course, they want to enforce U.S. hegemony. So that's another perk of having forces there.
Many perks.
Yeah.
Except for the people of the region and the U.S. forces who lose their lives as a result.
Exactly. So if you're a service member, not so great. If you're a Palestinian, definitely not so great. But besides that, hey, other people are reaping benefits. So there's that.
Isn't that weird? Let's turn to the Taylor Swift discourse. I don't know why, but Republicans have been increasingly sounding the alarm about Taylor Swift. They believe she's going to be a part of a Biden reelection campaign. And maybe that's true. But even before anything's been announced, they're basically sounding the alarm. And one reason for their alarm is that Taylor Swift is currently dating a member of the Kansas City Chiefs, which are playing very soon in the Super Bowl. And the growing theory is that this relationship that Swift is in with Travis Kelce, the Kansas City Chiefs player, is part of a psyop to basically infiltrate the NFL audience and convince people to vote for Joe Biden. So here is a host.
So you got the musical community and the sports community being infiltrated simultaneously. Wow. Exactly. It's a two-pronged approach. Okay.
So here is a host with One American News. That's a right-wing network. Laying
way
out,
to the right of Fox News.
Way to the right of Fox News even. Laying out her theory on what Taylor Swift is up to.
America's pop star celebrity sweetheart joins forces with the top dog in the NFL, playing for the team that's going to the Super Bowl. I mean, let's be real here. This is bread and circuses on steroids. Major League Sports, in and of itself, is nothing but a psyop. Get kids plugged into the cycle of going to public indoctrination camps, playing sports for their school, and going to games. Many end up devoting their entire childhood to competing in various sports, only to be cut from the team, at which point they become brainwashed into supporting professional teams because they know their dreams of becoming a pro athlete will probably never happen. So then they become obsessed with some grown man who gets paid millions of dollars every year to throw a ball around while promoting poison death shots and child slave labor through various brand deals and endorsements. So sad. Imagine being so brainwashed by sports, you actually show up to your team stadium to shovel snow for free so you can watch a bunch of grown men who are overpaid tackle each other. Seriously though, trudging through 3 feet of snow amid a massive blizzard just to watch a game? Yeah, sorry, you couldn't pay me to do that. Just imagine for a moment if people were as dedicated to Jesus as they are professional sports. I think the country might look pretty different if that were the case. But sadly, as we know, it's not. And perhaps that's why we're witnessing the crumbling and degradation of our once great nation. Instead, all we seem to care about are the celebrities and athletes propped up by the Hollywood elites and this ongoing theater, this fake, carefully crafted show that the masses have been hypnotized by and can't seem to turn off.
You know what? I got to say, a lot of good points in there. If you watch Manufacturing Consent, the movie about Noam Chomsky, there's a little scene in there where he talks about the role of sports in society. And his line is that sports promotes irrational attitudes of submission to authority and group cohesion. And, this OAN host coming at it from a different angle because of Taylor Swift and her presumed support for Biden is kind of making a similar point. So
I know.
Yeah.
That's what struck me. I was kind of like, this sounds almost Marxist.
Yeah.
Like almost a Marxist critique. Yeah.
Yeah. And then she says, if only people spent as much time, on the teachings of Jesus as they do to sports, we'd be a better country. I got to say, I agree with that too. Because if you read Jesus, he talks about peace and harmony and treating everybody as equal.
He cares about the poor.
Also is very Marxist or socialist,
right,
like
exactly.
whatever you want to call it. I don't think
maybe this woman's a liberation theologian.
Who knows? So, it's interesting. Sometimes we can find common ground with our right-wing counterparts, even if we come at it for different reasons.
I find sports very boring, especially football. So I'm kind of with her. Maybe I should send my resume over to OAN. They probably pay well.
We'd be sorry to lose you, useful idiots, but we'd understand, Katie. We'd support you in your new career path.
I could probably balance both. I could juggle.
Yes. Well,
unless they have an exclusive.
Well, here's more on this whole Taylor Swift response campaign. This is a conservative pundit named Jack Posobiec, who I got to say, I do sometimes when I see his name pop up, he says I agree with him when it comes to opposing the Ukraine proxy war. I totally disagree with him on most other things, but here he is also talking about the potential threat of Taylor Swift. But don't worry, conservatives. There's hope because there are other celebrities that you have on your side.
Change it to, and by the way, we can do this as well. We don't have a Taylor Swift on our side, but you know who we have? We have Kid Rock, we have Ted Nugent, we have influencers, right? We have all these people, John Voight. We have people that can come out and use their audiences, number one. And I want an army of Scott Presslers at every Kid Rock event and every Ted Nugent event. And I hope, by the way, and I need to talk to those guys about this because I've got this idea that maybe we even ask them, you guys mind doing a little tour later this year? Are you doing anything this fall? And I don't know where, but maybe I could think of a couple of states like, I don't know, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, to have them running around Nevada, of course, Nevada, please. Yes, of course, right here.
Hear that, Swifties? You may have Taylor Swift on your side. I'm not even sure if that's true, that Taylor Swift will endorse Joe Biden. But if she does, don't worry, conservatives, because you have Ted Nugent, you have Kid Rock, and you have John Voight, and they're coming to your town.
Yeah. I mean, Ted Nugent, I always find it interesting that conservatives like to claim him because he did soil himself to get out of serving in the military. He soiled himself during an army exam.
I did not know that about Ted Nugent. I did not know that.
Renaissance man. Yeah. Well, isn't that terrible? Let's just go straight to the videotape.
7/11, a Philadelphia woman is now facing federal charges for her unruly behavior on a Frontier Airlines flight from Florida.
I'm ready to be over here. Oh my, sorry, everybody. Are you serious?
Federal officials identified the woman as 60-year-old Dulce Huertas. The complaint claims Huertas was aggressive on the flight back to Philly from Orlando in November, demanding to use the bathroom. When she was told to stay seated, The complaint says she pulled down her pants, as you see in the video, exposing herself to children nearby, and she handled business that way.
Well, there you go. What has happened? Well, they say that she had 2 alcoholic drinks before the incident. I don't know how big they were. She is charged with interference with flight crew members, simple assault, and indecent exposure. And she faces a maximum sentence, of 21 years in prison and a $350,000 fine. Wow.
For people not watching, the co-host on that does a very funny facial expression at the end where he just kind of says, like, opens his mouth and looks like he's going to say shit or something, but he doesn't. Yeah. He was very, very impacted by that story. But Aaron, what do you have to say about this? Because I know you have some strong opinions on flight drinking.
Well, I want to address those who are close watchers of Useful Idiots, who now might be suspecting me of being behind this incident. Because if you watch the show, you'll know that last week I sparked some controversy, I believe, in the Useful Idiots community by coming out against drinking on planes. I said I think it's a bad idea. And lo and behold, now we have Exhibit A for why that should not be happening.
Exhibit B.
Exhibit B for why that should not be happening. I just want to tell you right now, I was not behind this incident. I did not stage this incident to prove my point.
Not a false flag.
This is not a false flag. This is not a psyop. I had nothing to do with that woman. I was not dressed up as that woman. That's a real person as far as I know. And yeah, it just proves my point. Why should we have alcohol on flights? It only leads to incidents like this. And I have sympathy for anyone who really has to use the bathroom. We've all been there before. But I blame alcohol for this. If not for the alcohol, I don't think we'd have seen that viral video.
Right, of that woman exposing herself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you ever partaken in alcohol on a flight?
I'm sure I have, but so I say from experience, I just don't think we need it.
Right. As someone who is have you been exposed to it? I don't mean exposed like we just saw, but have you been subjected to improper behavior on the part of others on flights, or is this just a rational thing, or do you have PTSD from something in particular?
No. I've definitely been on flights where just some guys are way too drunk and they're annoying, they're loud and they're obnoxious, and they harass people. They harass the flight attendants, they harass other passengers. It just, it's not fun. And some people just should not be drinking, period, and certainly should not be drinking on planes.
Right. Yeah. Just say no, guys. All right. Well, that's been your 4 basic food groups. Cheers.
Well, this week we have another Useful Idiots doubleheader. We are joined by 2 guests. Up first is Chris Gunness. He is the former spokesperson for UNRWA, and that is the UN agency serving Palestinian refugees. And UNRWA now is at the center of a new manufactured controversy by Israel and its allies, because just as the International Court of Justice handed down their ruling that there are plausible grounds to investigate Israel for genocide, Israel all of a sudden came out, literally simultaneously, with a claim that a very small number of staffers of UNRWA, the Palestinian Refugee Agency at the United Nations, were involved in October 7th. And the U.S. and a series of allies, including Germany and Canada, announced that they would be pausing UNRWA in response, which is a huge scandal because this agency provides essential services to Palestinian refugees who, of course, right now are enduring a genocide. And the allegation that UNRWA staffers were involved in October 7th had no concrete evidence to support it. Israel claimed that the intelligence it developed about these staffers came from interrogations, which means torture. But what this served was basically helping to distract from the issue at hand, which was the ICJ ruling that there are plausible grounds to investigate Israel for genocide and that Israel should stop blocking aid to Gaza. And of course, the U.S. media went along with this. There were big stories in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal article was written by a former Israeli soldier who was caught liking posts on social media that were mocking the deaths of Palestinians in Gaza, just to give you a window into how serious media coverage of this was. And House Republicans followed suit by holding a hearing in Congress on why UNRWA should be defunded. So to discuss that, we're very happy to be joined by Chris Gunness. He is a former spokesperson for UNRWA knows the agency very well and is very familiar with all the Israeli-led attacks on UNRWA that have been going on for a very, very long time, not just during this Gaza genocide. So here is Chris Gunness. Chris Gunness, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a real pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Your reaction to this move by the U.S. and its allies embracing these unsupported Israeli allegations that a handful of UNRWA staffers were involved on October 7th and cutting off funding to UNRWA.
I have to be honest and say, more in sadness than in anger, it does feel like a double betrayal. It's certainly betrayal by the 12, now 13 staff members who allegedly, and I use the word allegedly advisedly, have done these terrible things. I mean, we don't know, and I'm not clear that this information has been provided to UNRWA, whether these people actually were involved. If they were, then it's a betrayal of the 13,000 really extraordinary humanitarians, many of whom I know very well and have seen them all in action in Gaza. They feel very betrayed because their salaries are at risk. The food, the water, the electricity, the mattresses, the services they provide to what are now some of the most desperate, fragile, vulnerable people on the planet, that is now all at risk. So, it's a betrayal by those staff members and the ones who allegedly conducted these actions. It's the staff who are left behind to do the work. They feel very, very betrayed. And to be clear, these other people are now ex-staff members, so UNRWA has sacked them, invoking a part of the UNRWA constitution, as it were, which says that in the interests of the agency, the Commissioner General, the executive director, or whatever you want to call him, has the authority to do this. But it's a betrayal by the donors. And let's be clear about this. This is not good donorship. UNRWA is managed by the donor community led by the United States. And the management processes, which have been set up over, UNRWA is 73 years old. It began operations on the 1st of May 1950. And UNRWA has worked tirelessly with the donor community who manage UNRWA through their management, the ADCOM, as it's called, is this management body, led by the Americans as the biggest donor. And, the US Government Audit Office they did a root and branch audit of UNRWA in 2019. All of the textbooks which have proved so problematic, apparently, staff neutrality, all that stuff was gone through with a tooth comb. And, America carried on funding UNRWA to the tune of $350 million. So when you hear the donor community not give any reason why they're doing this, yet they defund, not saying to UNRWA what UNRWA has to do to bring back this defunding, you do begin to feel it's a political plot. It's certainly not good donorship. I would like to know the base upon which the British and the French and the others made this decision. What was in this dossier? Because I tell you, we in Britain are used to dodgy dossiers. Tony Blair and all of that lot, during as a pretext of the Iraq War, we were told there was this dossier with all this intelligent information. Saddam Hussein could hit London within 45 minutes. It all turned out to be a complete fiction. And the fact that UNRWA's been handed a list of names, information, a bit of information, but no evidence, the fact that Antony Blinken is quoted today saying America has not been able independently to confirm or verify this dossier, which was, by the way, handed over to the New York Times. UNRWA's not been given it. UNRWA's never been given it. And he's saying, it's very, very credible, but, we haven't verified it. Well, how can you say it's very, very credible if you haven't verified it? I mean, it stinks to high heaven. I mean, as I say this more in sadness than in anger. It smacks of bad donorship. It smacks of poor management. These failures, if they are failures, just, a few bad apples, that is as much the responsibility of the donor community led by the United States. And it's really very sad to see how we've arrived at this state of affairs.
What do you think the appropriate response would have been? What response would you have liked to have seen to these allegations?
The response that's been there for decades, and that is where there are credible reports, evidence of violations of neutrality, they are put before UNRWA. UNRWA has systems developed with our major donors, particularly the United States. They are investigated properly. We come back to our donors. We tell them what the problem is. If it's clear that there are if there's proper evidence of violations, staff are disciplined up to and including dismissal. And that's been what it's been like for decades, and it's what it's been like recently audited by the American GAO. So, that's the appropriate response. It's give us the evidence. If it's credible, and there's loads of stuff floating around, on the internet about what happened and blah, blah. If it's credible evidence, let's have it. UNRWA will investigate. And it's always done that to the satisfaction of all its donors, which is why they've continued to fund UNRWA for the last 73 years. That's the appropriate response. But we didn't get that appropriate response from the donors. We got what feels like a political onslaught, coordinated. And that's why we say, this has to change. I hope as a result of this, the Arab donors will realize that Western governments have this political stranglehold over this lifeline to the Palestinians. And I hope that Arab countries will step forward. If you look at OPEC profits from 2022, it was $888 billion. Well, UNRWA's budget is about 1.5 billion, and that's 0.02% of OPEC's profits in 2022. OPEC could solve this problem in a heartbeat, in a nanosecond. So I'd like to see, one of the good things that come out of this on the subject of good donorship, it would be great to see some Arab countries come forward and to loosen this Western stranglehold over UNRWA, because, we've got to see some good donorship. We've got to see some responsible donorship, because with this attack, that was a failure of donorship.
Talk to us a bit about what UNRWA does, the services it provides to Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but other regions where Palestinian refugees live, and its significance for Palestinian identity and existence.
Yeah. So look, I think it's good for your audience, a general audience, to think of UNRWA more as a government than an aid organization. So UNRWA works in Syria, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Gaza, and the West Bank. And it has core programs, and those core programs are education, health, relief, and social services. In education, UNRWA has 706 schools. UNRWA has 550,000 students. I mean, this is as big as the education department, bigger than some UN member states. UNRWA, 7 million patient visits to UNRWA's health clinics in a year. 400,000 of some of the most disadvantaged people, people with special needs, mental health issues, whatever it may be. There are 400,000 of those across the Middle East who come to UNRWA for services, relief and social services. They call it social protection. 1.7 million people come to UNRWA for food aid. 1.2 million of those are in Gaza. So, there's a huge, almost quasi-governmental function. And UNRWA does that as its bread and butter. But when terrible things happen, wars and refugee flows, things go wrong like they did in Gaza, UNRWA has to keep these core services ticking over, because children in Jordan and Syria and Lebanon still need to be educated just because there's an onslaught on Gaza. So UNRWA has to keep all of this going, so funding is needed for that. But then there's a massive spike in the need for funding in Gaza, because suddenly there's a huge increase in need. So pretty much 2.3 million people in Gaza, they all need support from UNRWA. The World Health Organization, or is it the World Food Programme, is now saying that there's a risk that more people will die of starvation in Gaza than under these Israeli bombs. So, there's a huge, huge need. There's the core services, and then there's the emergency service. And, frankly, UNRWA has no strategic reserve, right? So UNRWA's running, the tank's on empty, and UNRWA is desperately trying to tick over, and UNRWA can tick over really for another few weeks, and then it stops. The aid pipeline is very vulnerable, and then, the unimaginable starts to happen. People really do start to die of starvation. Already you have a situation where operations are taking place without anesthetic, women giving birth, without proper health conditions. I mean, it's really unthinkable. And what have these Western governments done? They've said that kind of work, it's the women coming in, the newly born, it's the pregnant mothers, it's the kids with 95% burns, gasping their last gasp, desperate for water. Those are the sorts of people whose aid is now under threat, and it's utterly heartbreaking.
These countries have decided to basically, in defunding UNRWA, they're sentencing an increased number of people to death, right? I mean, there's kind of no question about that.
I mean, that's a very stark and probably realistic way of putting it. I'm afraid I prefer to see the glass half full, and I have to pray that scenario does not materialize, because that is unthinkable. The idea that a group of Western donors driven by a clearly political Israeli agenda, we need to perhaps unpack that agenda later on, that the Western donors driven by that could, be in a situation where they, on a podcast like you, two reasonable people asking reasonable questions based on reality, are asking, are they basically complicit in the starvation of a population in the Middle East? I mean, that's what I call the definition of bad donorship. And it's led by the Americans. They're UNRWA's biggest donor. They are leading the donor community. UNRWA is managed by these people. So any failure, and let's face it, it's 12 or 13 bad apples in a staff of 13,000. That's 13,000 just in Gaza, by the way. So, it's a tiny percentage, about 1,000, 0.0001, I think it is. So, it is as put like that, it's terrifying, and let's hope it doesn't happen.
So I wanted you to respond to a statement by Netanyahu, who said on Wednesday, the time has come for the international community and the UN itself to understand that UNRWA's mission must be ended. UNRWA is perpetuating itself. It seeks to preserve the issue of Palestinian refugees.
And I think it's time that the international community and the UN itself understand that UNRWA's mission has to end. UNRWA is self-perpetuating. It is self-perpetuating also in its desire to keep alive the Palestinian refugee issue.
Right, so before I unpack that, can I just say that your audience needs to get a head around the fact that the state, which is lobbing thousands of munitions every day, including £2,000 bombs, is accusing an unarmed refugee agency of perpetuating the conflict. So let's use that as the frame for this answer. UNRWA registers the children of refugees, which is standard best practice amongst refugee agencies, the other UN refugee agency, UNHCR. So when, for example, a child is born to Afghan refugees in Pakistan, in UNHCR-administered camps or under the auspices of UNHCR, those children are registered under the principle of family unity. And the same is true with UNRWA, that when children are born to UNRWA refugees, they are also registered, and with that registration card, they become eligible if they need them, if they meet the criteria for UNRWA services. The idea, which is peddled by many Israelis, including, as you quote last night, from Mr. Netanyahu last night, it's peddled that there's this unique organization that has this political vendetta against Israel and is uniquely registering refugees, and therefore it's perpetuating the conflict. That is simply a deliberate misunderstanding and misreading, both of international law and refugee practice, but also, what UNRWA is about. UNRWA wants nothing more than to go out of business. And UNRWA goes out of business when the refugees are granted full dignity, human development, prosperity, justice, and accountability, and their rights, both individual and collective, are recognized and implemented and guaranteed in the context of a just and durable solution. Now, I, as an outsider, I'm not saying what that solution is. 2-state, 1-state, you decide. It's not, but can the Palestinians at least be asked? And can we at least find out, which there's extreme, skepticism over, whether Israeli leaders actually are prepared to give the Palestinians that state? Because from what we know of Mr. Netanyahu, there's the leaked transcript or memo of something said in a meeting. I mean, there are, and he's also said it publicly, about whether Mr. Netanyahu is prepared to allow the Palestinians to have the right to that just and durable solution, because it appears that it's the Israeli side that are perpetuating the conflict by not vouchsafing and granting to the Palestinians that right to a just and durable solution.
And, even prior to this new manufactured controversy, Israeli officials have been open about their plans to try to destroy Gaza. Last month, in late December 2023, there was a report in Israel that the foreign ministry had drawn up a plan to permanently shutter UNRWA whenever the Israeli assault on Gaza ended. And the following month, in early January, there's a former Israeli foreign ministry official named Noga Arbel who said, quote, "It will be impossible to win the war if we do not destroy UNRWA, and this destruction must begin immediately."
ואי אפשר יהיה לנצח את המלחמה אם אנחנו לא נשמיד את אונר"א וההשמדה הזו חייבת להתחיל מיד.
And she went on, they must be abandoned or they must go to hell. Chris, as a former spokesperson for UNRWA, what has your experience been personally when it comes to Israeli antagonism toward your organization?
Oh, I mean, I am the lightning rod for every hate crime the international Zionist organizations have ever sort of wanted to throw at the UN.
Congratulations.
The good news about this, though, is that the Israelis tend to hit the nuclear button immediately. And once they've hit the nuclear button, there's nothing worse they can throw at you. So, I had Ron Prosser, the Israeli ambassador, calling on Ban Ki-moon to sack me because obviously I'm a raving anti-Semite, I'm a Nazi, I'm a blah, blah. And actually once that's been said of you, once you've got over it, it's like, well, if that's it, we can now get on with life. So, I mean, it was very unpleasant. I was once PNG'd by Netanyahu's office and blah, blah. But I mean, to be honest, that's all a distraction. It's all sort of ad hominem arguments. It's all, it's really, that's not the point. But to get back to this whole thing of destroying UNRWA, two issues here, one practical and one, in a sense, political and legal. If Israel wants to get rid of UNRWA and get something else, create another organization, it's got very little time, let's be honest. I mean, time is of the essence in Gaza. UNRWA employs 13,000 people. So you'd have to employ 13,000 new people. You'd have to put job adverts in newspapers, websites. There are now 2.3 million people in Gaza who desperately need jobs. There was 46.9% unemployment in Gaza. It's now probably total unemployment. So there'd be probably 2 million application forms sent to UNRWA, maybe less because I guess children won't apply. UNRWA's HR department have sought through this sort of million job applications, sort out those they want to do the first interview, then do the interviews, then do the second interview, then on board the 13,000. Then they'd have to do sort of security screening on those 30,000. Then they'd have to give them neutrality training, because let's be clear here, neutrality frameworks and training is absolutely part of the lifeblood of UNRWA. Israel doesn't realize that the best partner it could have for neutrality in Gaza is UNRWA. But, and by the way, those staff people in Gaza, the UNRWA workers in Gaza get paid much, much less than even the local workers for WFP, WHO, OCHA, and all the others. So, be careful, donors and Israel, what we wish for, though Israel, of course, won't pay the bill. But it's going to take a long time to reconstitute it, and it's going to cost an awful lot more. And I would say it's completely impracticable. This is by sort of armchair humanitarians sitting around in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Washington, London. I don't know, they've obviously never been to Gaza and seen what UNRWA actually does. So that's one practical thing about replace UNRWA, get rid of UNRWA, let's do, and by the way, if UNRWA doesn't do it, maybe the occupying power might be asked to do it, which again, Israel disputes that it is the occupying power, but the IDF at the moment are occupying huge swathes of Gaza. And if anybody is going to be able to deliver humanitarian supplies, it's going to have to be the IDF. Not that I would think that many people would trust the IDF. So that's all the practical stuff. On the political stuff, there is this sort of crazy right-wing sort of Zionist fantasy in a way that if you get rid of UNRWA, you magically get rid of 6 million refugees, which is a bit like saying if you get rid of Oxfam, you get rid of hungry people and poor people. I mean, it's just odd. And it's also a complete misreading of international law, because if you did get rid of UNRWA, first of all, Israel, if it wants to get rid of UNRWA, would have to go to the General Assembly, which hands down UNRWA's mandate. UNRWA is a so-called subsidiary organ of the General Assembly. So Israel would have to go to the General Assembly, talk to all the nearly 200 delegations, and say, we want to change UNRWA's mandate, we want to abolish it, whatever it may be. And by the way, UNRWA does work in Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and the West Bank as well. So, if they want to abolish UNRWA there too, not sure. But they'd have to have that discussion with their interlocutors in the General Assembly. And then they'd have to somehow, work out how to have this transition. I mean, it's politically impractical. And even if they got rid of UNRWA, the refugees remain human beings with inalienable rights to human development, rights, both collective and individual, to a just and durable solution to their plight. And you can't get some far-right cabinet in Israel just deciding to airbrush out of history all of these people, plus the international protection mechanism, which grants them the protection and their rights. I mean, that isn't how international law works at all. And although Israel has managed to, I think, based on a pretty dodgy dossier, hoodwink the main donors of UNRWA into defunding, the people that UNRWA serves and the frameworks, the laws, on which that work is based cannot get wished away by Mr. Ben-Gvir and Mr. Smotrich and all these people. It doesn't. Unfortunately, they have to understand that international law doesn't work like that. I mean, when you heard the so-called Victory Conference, whatever it was called, in Jerusalem a few nights ago, I mean, I don't think people there really understand too much about the international humanitarian frameworks and laws that underpin the humanitarian work of the United Nations, sadly.
One thing we have to say about these allegations made against this, tiny fraction of UNRWA staffers, according to Axios, Israeli officials say that most of their so-called intelligence about these UNRWA staffers, and by the way, UNRWA says some of these people aren't even actually staffers of UNRWA, and that a few of them are even dead. But let's say
3 of them are either missing or dead.
Yeah. But Axios reported that according to Israeli intelligence officials, most of their so-called intelligence about UNRWA came from interrogations.
Right. So torture.
Anybody familiar with Israeli practice knows that's torture.
Let's talk about history. I mean, you read the Amnesty reports, read the B'Tselem reports, read lots of very wonderful Israeli human rights organizations who have done investigations, or some of the credible organizations on the world. I mean, I don't have accusations and evidence that these people have been tortured, but I mean, there are 7,500 Palestinians in Israeli detention, all held under this thing called administrative detention, which basically means they can arrest you because they think you're guilty and renew it every 6 months. And there are plenty of evidence of very, very bad things that happen to Palestinians. So, it'll be interesting to find out under what basis. I mean, the Red Cross have not had access, as far as I can understand. So it'd be interesting to see, what, for example, the Red Cross makes of this. But in any case, I mean, the Israelis handed over this dossier to the New York Times before they handed it over. Well, no, they haven't. No one's handed it over to UNRWA. So I was talking to friends in UNRWA today, and they said, no, it wasn't. We never got it. So I think they've managed to obtain it. I don't know where from, possibly from journalists. I mean, Sky News have got it. And if you read the Sky News report, it's really interesting. They say, we don't see that this is very compelling. And a lot of the stuff in it doesn't relate to UNRWA at all. So the question, I think, needs to be bounced back to the Western donors, which is, on what did you base this decision? Was it Israeli hearsay? Was it Israeli information obtained under duress? And I think, just as UNRWA is being held up to be accountable, I think we have to hold the donors up to accountability and ask, what did Israel give you? And did you independently verify it? Because there's some Anthony Blinken quotes around today where basically he's saying, we have not independently verified this evidence, but by the way, we think it's very, very compelling and credible. Like, how do you know it's credible if you haven't independently investigated? I mean, this is the stuff of political satire, and if it weren't so deeply tragic, it would be funny. I mean, it's really quite appalling. And by the way, if you let me just say one other thing, I mean, this organization, Impact SE, which the director of it was in Congress the other day, alongside various other people who've made, crazy and sometimes irrational and unsubstantiated claims against UNRWA. That organization, Impact SE, in 2019, they went, on a big PR campaign against UNRWA, the textbooks, and they said that these enrichment materials, so UNRWA checks all of its textbooks, and where there's a tiny percentage, 3 to 4% of problematic material, which isn't all, by the way, political neutrality questions. Sometimes it's age-appropriate violence, sometimes it's gender issues. But basically, UNRWA produces enrichment materials that teachers can use instead of the textbooks in the classrooms. It's all policed and the teachers are trained, whatever. So Impact SE apparently got hold of some UNRWA enrichment materials and said, this is all, it's full of anti-Semitism and preaching violence. And when we started to look at it, this was in the summer of 2019, it wasn't UNRWA's material. So this organization that's been briefing Congress people is the same organization that came up with allegations, and it was the wrong curriculum. And I mean, a few years before it, when it had a different name, it was making accusations against the PA textbooks. So in Gaza and the West Bank, UNRWA uses PA textbooks. And it came out with all these allegations about the textbooks, the PA textbooks. It turned out these were Jordanian and Egyptian textbooks. And by the way, this is the same organization that went on a political campaign to try and block the Palestinians joining UNESCO, the UN's education, scientific and cultural organization, where they would have had support with curriculum development. So this organization that claims to want to have, improved curricula around the Middle East actually attempted to block the Palestinians joining UNESCO. I mean, there's a clear political agenda. Their information is methodically shoddy, and many, Nathan Brown, for example, an absolutely brilliant educationist at Georgetown University, he has looked at these accusations, and I mean, a long time ago, but basically, he's found that UNRWA textbooks, by and large, are acceptable, and the mitigating steps UNRWA takes to deal with these problematic texts are also sound and well applied. So I'm afraid to say to Israel, UNRWA is your best friend in Gaza. I mean, after what you've been doing, UNRWA might not see it that way. But if you want to have an education system which has the highest possible standards of neutrality to the satisfaction of Israel's major donors, the US, Britain, the Europeans, then you need to stick with UNRWA, because reinventing UNRWA is simply not possible, both in practical terms, as I've explained, but also in terms of inculcating neutrality standards, which UNRWA's done, since May 1950, when we became operational in the Middle East. UNRWA's been doing that. So, UNRWA actually, though Israel doesn't realize, is the best friend it ever had in Gaza, and it really needs to wake up to that reality.
Chris Gunness, former UNRWA spokesperson. I'll never forget the time, 2014, 10 years ago, when you broke down crying about an Israeli attack on an UNRWA school in Gaza. What a powerful moment that was.
The rights of Palestinians, even their children, are wholesale denied, and it's appalling. My pleasure.
What a powerful defense of your former organization you've just given us. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Anytime. Be well. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye. Well, that was really great.
Chris Gunness, very grateful to him. He joined us with very little notice. So thank you, Chris. And thank you for your stalwart defense of your noble organization. And just when you thought that this genocide could not get just any more barbaric, the Biden administration never ceases to amaze, turning around and cutting funding to the agency that keeps Palestinian refugees alive. And as we heard from Chris Gunness, this is a campaign that goes on that long predates the current assault on Gaza.
Yeah. Also, shout out to Brett Stevens for just saying the quiet part out loud, writing an op-ed in the New York Times, abolish the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency. Thank you, Brett Stevens, for that. And a sincere shout out, though, to Spain, which is refusing to defund UNRWA. So thank you,
Good
Spain.
for Spain. Wow.
Good for Spain. Yeah, they've been pretty good on this. We're going to bring on our next guest, Steve Sosebee. He founded the Palestine Children's Relief Fund in 1991 and was the CEO and president until 2024. And in January of 2024, he founded Heal Palestine, a nonprofit focused on responding to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. So here's Steve. Steve, thank you so much for joining. I wanted to start off by asking you what brought you to Palestine in the first place.
So actually, just to take a step back, I actually went to Palestine first as a student activist. And then having gone during the first year of the first uprising back in December of 1988, I went back and started working as a journalist with the intention of sharing stories to try to educate Americans about what was happening on the ground from what I saw, not the reality of what was actually happening and what I experienced going there firsthand, and what people were conveyed. The information was being conveyed, the reality was being conveyed through the media in the United States. We're not the same thing. So I thought, hopefully, working as a journalist, I'd be able to educate Americans, particularly on how the occupation was affecting the daily lives of common people. And in the course of working as a journalist, I started to meet a lot of injured children who needed medical care they could not get within the local health system, and arrange for children to start coming to the United States for free medical care. And in the course of bringing those kids and getting them treatment, I realized I needed an organization to facilitate that work. It was becoming, something that was taking all my time, and I didn't have the resources. I was in my early 20s to manage this effectively. So I started a nonprofit called the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, and started to build an organization to bring kids over, and then the organization expanded significantly over the years. I must say that the big support came from a lot of people externally to help me get going in those early years, not the least of which was my late wife, Huda Al-Masri, who we got married in 1993 in January. But even in the early years before that, in the year before that, she was actively involved as a social worker, and deserves much credit and respect for the organization being able to get going in those early years.
And what is the effect right now of this genocide on the children of Gaza? And
Oh,
what have
gosh.
you've been there, right? Recently,
Yeah.
or are you going there?
Right. I'm actually waiting for my permit. So I have a Palestinian ID. So being able to enter Gaza, the Israelis put a different kind of restriction on people going in who have hawiyas, it's called IDs. And that puts different restrictions on being able to come out. So as long as I'm able to go in and go out without significant restrictions, I'm planning to go in 2 weeks or around the 13th. But to answer your question, of course, we have operations going on the ground there, and I'm very much aware, as we all are to different extents, what the circumstances are facing children in Gaza. And I mean, needless to say, it's dire beyond anything we've seen, even in modern history, to be honest with you. And when I mean that, I'm not trying to compare it to every conflict's unique in its own way, but in particular, this one in Gaza is unique in the sense that people have nowhere to go. In Syria and Iraq and Ukraine, and other conflict areas where civilians were being under the barrage of bombs and of risk of death, they could flee, and not easily. And as we saw in Syria, hundreds, if not thousands, of refugees died in the Mediterranean trying to flee. But in the case of just immediate safety, getting out of harm's way of bombings and the destruction that's all around. In Gaza, there's nowhere to go, and there's no safe areas. And that, as a result, we've seen over 10,000 children killed since October 7th. And keeping in mind that that's 1% of the entire population of children in Gaza. So not insignificant, to say the least. And we also see over 30,000 children with significant physical injuries, many of them permanent, amputees and so on. And that also is putting a huge burden on the health system, which is collapsing because there's really only one functioning hospital right now, the European Gaza Hospital in Han Yunis, which I've worked in for many years, and know that hospital very well. It does not have the capacity at all to manage what the trauma that they're seeing, and forget the fact that people who have medical conditions that require interventions, people with heart conditions, people with car accidents, people who have congenital malformations or need any of the common ailments that come up in a normal society, they're not getting treatment at all. And so the casualty toll that we talk about, which is based strictly on the numbers of people being killed by bombs and through trauma as a result of the attacks and the ongoing conflict on the ground, those statistics do not include the thousands of people who are not able to get adequate medical care for common non-trauma related ailments. And in many cases, those people are dying. And they're also victims because, we were able to treat those patients previously by bringing in volunteer medical teams. We were doing hundreds of missions a year into Gaza and into the West Bank. And those missions are all stopped as a result of the conflict on the ground, of course. And all those patients that we were treating for open heart surgery, for neurosurgery, for cancer, and so on, are not getting treatment locally, and they need to go outside for care. And in the case of those going outside for care, it's extremely difficult to get permits for injured and sick children to travel outside for treatment. Even if you arrange their treatment, which we're doing in Heal Palestine, we're arranging treatment for injured children and sick children to get treatment outside for free. Getting them out is really the biggest challenge we're facing, and it's very difficult to overcome that challenge. But the biggest issue now is not necessarily the immediate health needs of kids on the ground in Gaza, although that's immense and that cannot be, ignored at all. But the bigger challenge is starvation and hunger. And now we see hundreds of thousands of children suffering from the lack of food. 90% of the population there goes at least one day without eating at all. And we're talking about children. As you all know, 40% of Gaza are children under the age of 15. And keep in mind that there are literally hundreds of trucks full of food on the Egyptian side of the border, ready to come and feed children who are showing signs of malnutrition and undergoing the early stages of starvation. So this is strictly a man-made problem, and the fact that food's being used as a weapon of war in this modern era of 2024 is really unconscionable, and it's hard to imagine that this is taking place in front of the world's eyes and that nothing's being done to stop it.
What is the possible justification for not letting in food, or something else that's happening now, which is absolutely horrible to think about, is people are being operated on without anesthesia? What is the possible justification, and chemotherapy is no longer getting through, right? What is the possible justification for that? What are they saying?
Well, I don't know if there is a stated justification for it. It's definitely a policy. I'm sure there are security issues of checking the trucks, to ensure that they're not filled with arms and military needs. But we all know that prior to October 7th, there were 500 trucks entering Gaza a day, and those trucks were also undergoing security review at Karam Shalom, so crossing in southern Israel. So as a result, I don't think there's a justification that there's too much of a load to adequately review and to check. So there is a political purpose behind it. I think you'd have to review the Israeli stated media. What the politicians are saying in the Israeli media and Israeli press to kind of understand what the justification are. I know that there are now protests among Israelis that is in some cases being encouraged by some ministers in the far right government to block the trucks coming into Gaza. And that's really unimaginable because, you have kids starving, and these are not combatants. They're not Hamas. They're not people who committed any crimes on October 7th against the Israeli people. They're innocent children. But to come to the realization in your mind that these are somehow justified people who are guilty of any crimes when they're just 3, 4, 5-year-old children, newborn babies, I don't understand it. I don't think anybody understands it, but it's what's happening. And it's affecting all of us. It's affecting everybody on the ground in Gaza and all of us as aid organizations trying to respond to this crisis in a way that can hopefully impact the lives of these people in a positive way.
You have children. Are you afraid? Not just because you're a father, but I would assume that gives you extra fear. Are you afraid for your own safety about going to Gaza?
I never have been before. I've been going to Gaza since 1988. I've been there hundreds of times. I've never had any fear at all going there. In fact, when I was there a few months ago, I was, had a car and was driving by myself around the Gaza Strip and, in every refugee camp and all over the place. So I never felt any personal fear from anyone. But I think if the fear now would be that the bombing campaign seems to be indiscriminate, and that you could easily be near a hospital or near a UN school full of displaced people, many of them children, and still be hit by a bomb or something like that. So as a result, there is some concern about one's personal safety, but I think you go into this kind of work with the idea that you have a greater mission in your life. You have a responsibility to the cause and the people you're serving. And I don't think throughout history any positive change has happened by people who are putting their lives ahead of the cause. That's not to say I'm jumping into something recklessly and I'm a danger addict or somebody who is careless with my own personal safety. But I run a relief organization. There is a genocide going on. There are people who need help. There are injured children that we need to help. There are hospitals that need medical supplies. There are people who can't get the basics to survive. And if I have a responsibility to help them and also to show them solidarity and that, not everybody is, on the side of having their children's lives taken so carelessly and so graphically. Hopefully that'll, show some element of humanity and support that will keep them going as human beings on a human level.
Stephen, you've helped a lot of children in Palestine. Can you tell us a story of someone who either you've helped in the past or someone who you're looking to help now?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the story of Izzadeen, who was 16 years old in 2018 when he was part of the Great Return March demonstrations, which were taking place at the walls of Gaza. These were mainly refugee youth who were going to demonstrate to demonstrate to the world that they were still refugees and they wanted to return to their homes and mandate Palestine and what is now the state of Israel. Izzadeen, having lost his leg, came to our organization, and we were able to arrange for him treatment in the U.S., where he received a prosthetic leg and learned to walk again. And I remember taking him back home on a flight. He was a very sweet boy, always smiling, very polite. And that when he went back home, I started a program to employ amputees in our organization as field workers, to give them opportunities to have a future and to gain some element of self-esteem and independence. That was really our goal. Izzadeen came in as a photographer, so we put him with our content creation crew, the guys who were doing our social media and in the field kind of documenting our work. And he just flourished. I mean, he was so happy to have an opportunity. He never thought that he would be able to do something, with his life that he liked doing and that he gave him some income. And for the last year or so, he was just kind of like taking off. And then when on October 7th, when the war started, I was in touch with him and, just encouraging him to stay safe and not to worry about work, but to really focus on his family and staying out of harm's way. But on December 25th, on Christmas Day, his home was hit by an airstrike and him and his entire family were killed. And and I've had those stories with several kids that we've brought out for medical care, children that have come to the States for certain congenital defects or, we had kids, 2 boys who had maxillofacial deformities of their faces and came to Louisiana for significant reconstructive surgery. They were both killed in a home bombing back in early November. And these were just 13, 12-year-old boys. So you develop ties and relationships with the kids we treat. I have, and hundreds of them. And then their lives are just, destroyed in a brief moment. And it's really sad and tragic. And you don't see an end in sight. And for somebody like Izzadeen, who was so young and so full of life and always smiling, and despite, having lost his leg and he was for the rest of his life a cripple, he was pursuing his dream. And then to see his entire family killed in a bombing of his home in a refugee camp, that, just the whole trajectory of his life, being born into a refugee camp in Gaza, being permanently injured to the point where, the rest of his life, he had to wake up in the morning and put an artificial leg on to be able to walk. And then an organization coming in and giving him a chance for a better life and to be mobile and be independent. And then to have all that destroyed. This is the story of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza. He's just one of thousands. And every single one of them is very sad and tragic.
And what is the effect of UNRWA defunding on the children of Palestine?
Oh, it's amazing. It's significant. UNRWA is the government provides government services, I guess, for, Gaza is 70% refugees from 1948. And all of those refugees receive basic humanitarian services from UNRWA. In the case before October 7th, that included education. The schools that are now full of displaced people, those are UNRWA schools for the most part. And then they were receiving food. They were receiving healthcare, primary healthcare, which, again, is for the most part closed down. But UNRWA is just one of the main life sources for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians inside the Gaza Strip who, without UNRWA, would not be able to survive. So, there's no Palestinian government providing them those services. There's no other aid agency on the scale of UNRWA that can come in and provide food, education, and health services for the refugee population there. So to defund them, to take away that critical element of humanitarian support that they're providing at this time is just beyond on any form. I can't just understand it. If anyone within UNRWA as employees, and they have 30,000 employees in Gaza, participated in the terrorist attacks on October 7th, I don't think that that's a reflection of any kind of official company policy on the part of UNRWA. Those are the acts of individuals, and it's very hard to be responsible for people when you're a company or an organization of 30,000 employees, and especially in the condition that people live in Gaza. So it's just it's a political effort. It's not a security issue, and the people who are suffering are going to suffer from it are the same people who are suffering now, the poorest, most marginalized and vulnerable people in Gaza, which are the refugee children. And there's hundreds of thousands of them.
As someone who's worked with doctors and has seen how important medical care is for children, what do you have to say to the doctors in Israel, the doctors who signed a letter calling for more bombing?
I mean, it's hard to imagine a physician who takes the Hippocratic oath to, do no harm, would support violence in any form. We are all very much aware of, we should be aware of the tradition of kind of the most basic Jewish humanitarian and humanistic ideals. I mean, in the United States, the forefront of the civil rights movement, social justice change has always been led by the Jewish community, or at least a big significant part of it. And they walked with Martin Luther King. They gave their lives to deal with social justice issues in this country and all over the world, and have been persecuted terribly as a result. And to now see that, and I'm not saying that this has anything to do with Jewish values, but to see doctors in Israel who are calling for continued violence. And we see what that violence means. It's not really having a military effect on Hamas as much as it is resulting in the death of innocent people. 70% of all deaths in Gaza are women and children. So it's just unimaginable. But I think the deeper question is, where is this coming from? Where is this deep-seated hatred or anger? And I mean, of course, some of it comes from what happened on October 7th, and we all know how horrific that violence was. But, I don't think that physicians are beyond the ability to contextualize and compartmentalize these issues, in the sense that things don't happen in a vacuum, and that we need to be able to define our reaction in a way that doesn't harm innocent people. And if innocent people are being harmed, hopefully nobody would find that to be a positive thing or to encourage more of that. I find it strange. I deal with a lot of Israeli doctors. I have over the years. I've always found them willing to help and very, humanitarian in their values. So I don't know who these doctors are, but we see a very worrisome trend in Israeli society. If you have people going down to the border and trying to block aid shipments of food when children are starving, and you see doctors, you see a conference, I think it was a couple of days ago in Jerusalem, where literally a rally to settle Gaza with settlements and on top of the rubble of people's homes. There's a very worrisome trend in Israel that we haven't seen before, to be honest with you, of kind of, and it's everywhere in the world, but it's kind of very graphic right now in Israel with the right-wing extremism and borderline fascism, which, we have in the States as well. But in this case, the way it's being played out in Gaza is the results are, 1% of all children have been killed, 1%. And that would be, in the context of the United States population, would be 700,000. Imagine if 700,000 children in the United States were killed, through bombing campaigns from a foreign country. It would just be outrageous. So the fact that that's happening, and that there are people who support that and encourage it and want to see more of it in a democratic society, in a liberal democratic, what was or traditionally has been a liberal democratic society, is quite worrisome. And it gives us a lot of, I think, fear for the future.
Stephen, you founded the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. You led it for 3 decades. Now you founded a new group called Heal Palestine. Talk to us about your new organization and how people can support it.
Yeah, thank you. So for 30 years, I was very proud of the work we did in PCRF. We built 2 pediatric cancer departments, one in the West Bank in the name of my first wife, and one in Gaza. We opened a lot of different really incredible projects and programs. We brought hundreds of doctors, treated thousands of children. Very successful work. It inspired, literally tens of thousands of people all over the world to get involved and be active. And we're very proud of that. But when this crisis began, and even before that, I was thinking about, what I could do more than just within the health sector, although that's an area that I want to continue to work in. But I think there's a greater need to expand into areas that I think, I could have an impact. I have 30 years experience on the ground in the West Bank and Gaza. I want to use that in the most effective way. And I felt within PCRF, that my ability from a leader and from somebody who's active on the ground far exceeded what the organization's kind of scope is. So I wanted to broaden my impact and to go into the area of education, where I think there's a huge need and there is definite potential for positive impact. And then finally into the area of leadership. And when this crisis began and we started seeing tens of thousands of permanently disabled children in Gaza, I felt this would be a great opportunity to build a program where we use the skills and support of literally thousands of mentors all over the world who can come in and take responsibility for helping to rebuild the lives of these children over the long term. That means, mentoring them, supporting them, guiding them in areas where they could eventually become independent in careers, vocational training, education, and guiding us as an organization to identify the needs of all these kids and ensure that we meet those, whether they're mental health issues, and as we said before, eventually getting to the point where they have career options ahead of them, and that we're going to come in and help support those options. So that's where, and literally, we have outside of Palestine one of the most developed diaspora communities of executives, of doctors, of engineers, of accountants, of professional people who are looking for more opportunities to serve their cause and to do something positive for their people rather than just either protest or write checks. And those are important things to continue to do as well. But I think, not tapping into that resource of talent that we can utilize to help rebuild the lives of these children whose lives are being destroyed, I think is we're missing a great opportunity to build a grassroots organization that really utilizes a kind of a new way of effective, impactful change. And by linking the communities abroad with the need on the ground, particularly in the human sphere of rebuilding the lives of these tens of thousands of children who are, facing a very dim future and on the brink of hopelessness, if not already deeply embroiled in it, then we're not doing all that we possibly can as, I think, creative relief people who can use, more importantly, the tools of technology and our communities abroad to make positive change for now and, more importantly, for the long term. So that's really why I left PCRF and started something new. I thought there was a lot more that I could do, and there's a lot more that our communities could be doing than what PCRF was giving people. As great as an organization as it is, and I was very proud of founding the organization and leading it for 30 years. There's much more I think I could be doing, and I'm excited about that opportunity.
Any final words that you'd like to share? Thank you so much for your generous time.
Thanks for having me, of course. I mean, I think at this point, we all know what's happening in Gaza. There aren't any secrets about what's really happening and the effect of this war on the civilian population there. What we have to do as people who care about humanity, you don't have to be Palestinian or Muslim or Arab to actually see this as a crime against humanity. And what we have to do is find positive ways that we can help rebuild and repair the lives of these innocent people. My experience in Gaza for over 30 years is they're some of the most kind, generous, resilient, and just very, very decent people who I've never had a negative interaction with in my life. And to just see their entire lives destroyed is very, very saddening. And I think all of us have a responsibility to help rebuild and to help show them love and compassion and to give them opportunities for them to heal. And that's what my goal is for the rest of my life. And I hope that this war will end soon, that there will be a ceasefire, that we can have some kind of larger political resolution to this issue. It's time for that. This can't continue the way it has for the past 50, 60, 70 years. There has to be some equality and dual national identity in the land of Israel, Palestine, where people can live side by side in security and also as equal and have their identity secured as well. And I think that's critical if we're going to find ever peace there. It's a beautiful land. I love living there. I love working there. But I'm very, very concerned about the future if this situation continues.
Thank you so much, Steve
You're
Sosebee,
welcome.
for your time.
My pleasure.
And your work.
Keep up your good work as well. We really appreciate it. God bless you.
And that was Steve Sosebee, who does such important work and is so fearless and compassionate. And it must be heartbreaking to do the work that he does.
I can't even imagine. And very humbling to speak to a genuine humanitarian who devotes their life to helping other people. I mean, imagine the heartbreak of this current moment, all the people who Steve has helped going through so much unspeakable horror and, building hospitals and clinics and seeing all that attacked by Israel.
Bombed into smithereens. Or the children that he helped save and give chemotherapy to who survived cancer and then were killed in bombings, or who will be killed through starvation. But we've already seen, he's posted on Twitter, very sad, moving things showing the kids who his organization literally helped save from cancer, only to be then bombed by Israel. It is so inhumane and unconscionable. And people really are going to look back at this time and say, how the hell did this happen? How were people silent in the face of it?
A very depressing episode of Useful Idiots, but the least we can do is bear witness. And that's what we try to do in this moment. And may it come to an end ASAP. It has to end. It's unbelievable.
And given how important this episode is, none of it will be paywalled, so everyone will be able to see it. And our very generous Substack supporters and subscribers will get, of course, as always, the Thursday Throwdown, your midweek dose of media madness. So we're not leaving you behind.
All right, usefulidiotspodcast.com is our website. Go there to support the show and get bonus content. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For extended episodes, bonus content, and our weekly Thursday Throwdown episode, please subscribe at usefulidiotspodcast.com. Support the show for free by subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review. You can also follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod. Thanks for supporting independent media. We'll see you next time.